I and 4 or 5 others here today were fortunate to have her as a member of our memoir group earlier in the church year, where she shared insights to the immigrant child experience. After immigrating to the United States from the Netherlands in the 50s, Marika spent her school years in Oklahoma. She received a BA in English from Oklahoma City University and then married and moved to Wyoming with her husband, Mike. Here they had 2 sons and enjoyed the vast beauty of the mountainous West. Mike's work brought them to Phoenix in the early 90s, and soon thereafter Marika found West Valley UU Church and has been an active member ever since. She currently serves on the Worship Services Committee, and her interests and hobbies include reading, writing of course, needlecrafts, photography, and antiques. Marika?
Good morning. Good morning. It's an honor to be here as your speaker this morning. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to tell you some things that I've learned about the philosopher known as Spinoza. I'd like to start with a short story which illustrates my feelings about the topic of philosophy. A renowned philosopher was held in high regard by his driver, who listened in awe as his boss lectured and answered difficult questions about the nature of the universe and the meaning of life. Then one day, the driver approached the philosopher and asked if he was willing to switch roles just for one evening. The philosopher agreed, and while reading the lecture, the driver handled himself remarkably well. However, when it came time for questions, someone at the back of the room asked him, "Is the epistemological account of the universe that you seem to espouse still valid in an existential account of the world?" "Oh, that's such an extremely simple question," he replied. "So simple, in fact, even my driver could answer that." Which is exactly what he will do. Needless to say, I feel much more like the driver today than the philosopher. I've dabbled in philosophy, reading a little here and there, but I've really never studied it systematically. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm a little bit intimidated by it. Recently, however, I've become acquainted with the philosopher known as Spinoza. I'll tell you how we met. A few months ago, my sister in Ohio called my attention to the fact that a new book was available about Amsterdam, the city in which we were born. Always fascinated by and curious about my origins, I looked it up on Amazon right away and decided to order a copy. The full title of the book is Amsterdam, A History of the World's Most Liberal City. It was written by Russell Shorto. When it arrived, I'm going to show you a copy of it. I loved it before I even opened it. The beautifully designed desk jacket made me want to just delve right in. This is not a travel guide. It's a real book. A history book written in an extremely interesting and engaging style. Through Russell Shorto, I became acquainted with Spinoza, and today I would like to introduce him to you. When Shorto uses the words liberal and Amsterdam in the same sentence, immediately images of drugs, prostitution, and euthanasia come to mind. However, this is not what he writes about, at least not until the last chapter. He uses the word liberal, derived from the Latin for free, to refer to the centrality of the individual. It refers to people who are free to forge a career and make money. It applies to those who are free to own property and choose their own government. Therefore, it is closely related to democracy. Liberalism represents our break with the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, it was widely accepted that knowledge and power were directly received either from the church or the monarchy. However, in the newly established modern era, which began in the early 1600s, liberalism introduced a commitment to the individual freedom and rights of people, not just for oneself, but for everyone. Even as late as the late 1500s, the Protestant Reformation, as well as the social and geographic conditions in Amsterdam, everything was beginning to come together to cause this new way of thinking. The city became a hotbed for this new liberalism. Many of these forces also came together in the mind of a young Amsterdam Jew. Bento de Spinoza not only became a world-class thinker and philosopher, he can well be considered a modern-day prophet. He was not a predictor of the future in the old sense of the word, but a person who had a gift of spiritual and moral insight. He was an effective spokesman for his own doctrine and principles. Bento, which means blessed in Portuguese, was born in 1632 to Miguel and Ana de Spinoza. They were Portuguese Jews who had settled in Amsterdam. Liberal ideas had not yet flourished on the Iberian Peninsula. Its large Jewish population was being forced to convert to Catholicism, and this resulted in many of them living a lie. The Marranos, as they came to be called, practiced the Catholic faith in public, but continued their Jewish worship in secret. Eventually, both Spain and Portugal began deporting all their remaining Jews. They wandered the earth in search of new homes. Amsterdam became a haven for many of the Marranos. They were first allowed to settle there as long as they didn't worship openly. But in the early 1600s, they were allowed to go public. A large Jewish neighborhood sprung up, and a synagogue was built. The school they established was among the best in Europe. Miguel de Spinoza, who had built up a profitable trading company, sent his son Bento to be educated there. In school, he began to be called by his Hebrew name, Baruch. If this sounds a little bit familiar, it comes from the same root as Barack, as in Obama. And both names mean blessed. The school he attended was just down the street from his house and right next to the synagogue. Here Spinoza studied Hebrew and Torah, as well as Talmud, the Jewish laws. He was developing a fine mind and became used to using multiple languages. He spoke Portuguese at home, Spanish at school, Hebrew for Jewish studies, and Dutch on the streets. At around age 18, after his older brother died, Spinoza was forced to leave school to help his father run the trading company. He became a businessman operating in the liberal and free trading city. He was becoming influenced by the basic tenets of capitalism. He was also reading everything he could find about politics, society, and human nature. He began to learn about the works of René Descartes, the French philosopher who had spent much time in the Dutch Republic. The clergy had accused Descartes of being radical, revolutionary, and, worst of all, an atheist. However, these qualities attracted young Spinoza to his work. Descartes wrote in Latin, so in order to truly understand what Descartes' work was all about, Spinoza realized he needed to learn this language as well. So as a result, he gave up his role in the family business and signed up for Latin school. Here, he and a group of other young men became not only students of the head of the school, Franciscus van den Enden, but they also became his disciples. Teachers and students were united in their quest for truth and justice outside the established religions. As Spinoza became comfortable with his new affiliations, he made a conscious decision to choose philosophy as his life's work and to take up Descartes' challenge to orient his life around reason. These actions and concepts proved to be too difficult to accept for the leaders of Spinoza's synagogue. As a result, on July 27, 1656, when he was only 23 years old, the rabbis of the Jewish community of Amsterdam took the drastic step of excommunicating him. They, and I quote, expelled, damned, and cursed him with the consent of God. They cursed him by day and by night, cursed him when he lay down and when he rose up, and cursed him when he came in and went out. Spinoza had a right to appeal this excommunication, but he did nothing. Actually, he seems to have treated it as a relief. He is quoted as saying, "All the better they do not force me to do anything that I would not have done on my own accord if I had not dreaded scandal. But since they want it that way, I gladly enter on the path that is open to me." So he said goodbye to his family and his community and went off in search of new meaning. He did not convert to Christianity or any other faith. This lack of affiliation gave him the freedom to follow his own path. He began to offer something new, a religion of reason. After his excommunication, Spinoza again changed his first name, this time to the Latin form of blessed, Benedictus. He also dropped the Portuguese article de and came to be known simply as Spinoza. He moved to a small community outside of Amsterdam and later to The Hague. He lived simply and modestly on just pennies a day and supported himself, as Sandra told us, by grinding lenses for glasses, microscopes, and telescopes. And this was a new field at that time. The rest of the time, he wrote. In 1670, he completed his first great work. It's entitled Treatise on Political Theology. Its purpose was a first in history, to separate theology from politics. In other words, church and state. It was his opinion that people don't need the church or a king to tell them what's right and wrong. Using the power of your own reason, you can figure it out for yourself. These were still considered to be heretical and treasonous thoughts, but many people began to agree with him, and Spinoza's ideas began to spread. Even though he was expelled from Judaism for being an atheist, Spinoza's central work, called Ethics, is actually essentially a discussion about God. He believed that God is the totality of all that is. To him, God is even bigger than nature. It is the infinity of substance and includes all matter as well as all thought. What this really means is that if you strip away all the definitions of God in the Bible and other conventional religions, you'll be left with a being of infinite attributes. In an oversimplification, we could just say, less is more. Throughout his life and work, Spinoza had one main purpose: to discover truth. This coincides with the aim of philosophy and science. He found the aim of religion and theology to be quite different and preferred it to be kept apart from philosophy and science. In his view, it is not religion's job to find truth, but religion exists to interpret the truth about God to people in a way that they can understand it. Its role is to tell stories to help us decide how to behave better lives. He found it a somewhat useful structure in helping people get along with each other and live more peacefully. But even with this kind of somehow a kind definition in place of religion, Spinoza criticized organized religion severely. He described holy books, holy days, angels, and prescribed rules and prayers as man-made trappings existing only for the churches to exercise control over their people. And he deemed the action known as divine revelation as completely unnecessary. Spinoza needed only the revelation given him by the natural powers of reason. He denied that God is interested in intervening in human affairs. He does not sit in some kind of heaven, judging human behavior or controlling natural forces. God just is, and God's being goes on indefinitely. Because God is equivalent to being, or to nature, the result is that the more we understand about nature, the more we understand about God. This understanding is Spinoza's definition of what he calls blessedness. It also entails learning how to become a master of one's own emotions. By doing this, we free ourselves from bondage and truly enable happiness. The love of God is an affirmation of being a part of nature. He said, and I quote, "Whatever is in God, and nothing can either be or be conceived without God." For Spinoza, nature is the origin of everything, and its laws are the only laws which are divine. Albert Einstein, on being asked once if by a rabbi if he believed in God, answered, "Yes, I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fates and actions of human beings." Benedict Spinoza, truly a peaceful and gentle spirit, but always physically frail, died in 1677 of tuberculosis, probably brought on by the dust of his lens grinding. He was 45 years old. The attainment of truth was the one object of his life, and for this he sacrificed everything. I hope you've enjoyed getting acquainted with Spinoza. To know him on a deeper level would take much more time. But after this morning, if you should run into him, like in a book or a conversation, for instance, you'll be able to say, "Yes, we've met before." I've discovered that his philosophy is still as relevant today as a Rembrandt painting or a Mozart melody. I learned that he faced many of the same issues we still struggle with today. I know a few things about him now, and eventually I hope to get to know him better. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika. Please stand as you are willing and able, and join in the singing of today's closing hymn, We Would Be One, number 318. Thank you. And join me now, please, in the unison reading of West Valley's mission statement. We agree to provide a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for our lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches. Go now in peace, and may the spirit of love surround you everywhere you go.